Okay, hi, Brian Parker again. How you doing? It's another exciting adventure of learning the law, law and lawyering unplugged. You can go to my website, collectionstopper.com, and go to Podcast Plus for everything I've done and featured, and all the documents are right there, as well as today's documents. And today's video is 5 tips for fighting a student loan solutions lawsuit. That's a popular one. I do a lot of those both in Michigan and Florida. And the differences are kind of cool, not for Florida residents, but I'm going to get into that and how to beat them. So these are 5 tips how to beat SLS. Now, it's called Student Loan Solutions, and I have yet in 30 years to see... I haven't been practicing against SLS for 30 years, but in 30 years I've never seen one student find any solutions from Student Loan Solution. Nothing good anyway. Who they are. SLS, we'll call them SLS, is an entity that mostly, at least in my experience, buys Bank of America debt from like 2013 to 2018. And they buy a lot of it, and then they sue on it, but they wait for whatever reason, because a lot of times they get it by 2016, 2017, but they wait until 21, 22, 23, again in my experience. So the first thought I always have is, oh great, this is a statute of limitations case. I got the greatest defense. But in some states, you can, as an owner of a debt, if you can prove you own the contract that the student and Bank of America sign, inside that contract generally is a full balance demand, which means in some states, while the statute of limitations may be over, because this is debt from way back when, if demand has not been made for the full balance as the contract discusses, then when that demand is made, the statute of limitations starts again. And some states have case law that supports this. One of them is Florida. So I've got cases against SLS here, Michigan, etc. And that is, in some cases, a valid lawsuit. So you can have a debt that you haven't paid on in 10 years, and the statute of limitations, and these are all private debts, by the way, has long gone, and yet you get sued for them with the first thought, hey, the statute of limitations has passed. But for Florida, for example, there is case law that says once the demand for full balance is made, then the statute starts. So the first thing you're going to receive is, if you're watching this, you're probably familiar with this, you'll get a letter from a debt collector called Williams and Fudge. And no jokes, please. And then they will ask for the full amount. It is then that SLS says to itself, and then later in a lawsuit, the statute has started, statute of limitations started, we've got X amount of years to sue on this. And that letter, when you get that letter, it's coming. Your lawsuit against you is coming. So how do you get around that? Well, I mentioned the statute of limitations. Let's just briefly talk about that. If, for example, in Michigan, 6 years from when the last payment was due, if you aren't sued in that 6 years, you cannot be sued on that debt. In Florida, generally it is 5 years. In California, student loan SOL, statute of limitations, is 4 years. So how do we beat them when they technically are showing that they are only making the first demand 10 years after the thing's been charged off? Well, the whole balance resurrection of the statute of limitation, meaning the whole balance, the whole amount is asked for after you've long gone, not even thought about this debt, is embedded in some of these contracts, possibly all of them. But here's a cool thing, and I can't believe clients have this, but what happens, and this is generally what happens with creditors, before they charge it off or sell the debt, a creditor will approach their debtor and say, look, you owe us all this. Hey, how about making a deal? So that's what Bank of America did. These are mostly Bank of America debts that SLS picks up. And prior to selling it, Bank of America sent all these letters out to their debtors saying, yo, the full balance, we'll make you a deal. We'll knock 25% off or something like that. But they're demanding the full balance unless the person contacts them within a certain period of time. So Bank of America seeks the full balance prior to selling the debt to SLS. You'd be surprised, and I hope you're one of them, how many of my clients have kept those letters, in some cases from 2013. And those letters come from a debt collector called Sunrise Collections. On behalf of Bank of America, they seek the full balance from the debtor, and they give them a time limit, and then the case or the debt goes away. Somewhere down the line, the debt is then charged off, so Bank of America charges off, then sells all their student loan debt to SLS. Here's an example of what those letters look like. I'll put two up. Shazam. I show you this because, again, clients have these letters. They're usually from Sunrise Collection. It's possible that Williams and Fudge may be one of these letters, the older letters, but generally it's going to be Sunrise Collections or Bank of America directly. So if you have one of these letters, I'll show you tip number one, the importance of the whole balance resurrection letter. If you have one of these letters and it says we seek the whole balance, that is what we discussed, the provision in the contract that says at any time the lender can seek the whole balance if there's a default. That's them doing that. So then SLS comes along, and 10 years later, Williams and Fudge sends a letter saying we want the whole balance. Why are they doing that? Because they want to resurrect what they believe is the first time request of this contract they claim to have purchased. But you've already been subject to that full balance. So the 5 years or the 6 years or the 4 years has started when you get that first letter from BOA or Sunrise Collections. So look in your files for those. They could get you out of debtor jail. Not that there is one, but it's a great expression to say can get you out of jail. So if you have a letter seeking full balance on these debts, regardless who they're from, that trumps the Williams and Fudge letter that is recently sent to you that is the basis of a lawsuit against you where SLS claims the statute of limitations has been resurrected. So if you have that letter, it's a great way to get out of the lawsuit. But it's got to ask in some way for the full balance. Tip number two, I mentioned California because a lot of these SLS lawsuits are based on a Bank of America contract, and they wrote into their contracts a choice of law provision. A choice of law provision is, and you don't agree to this, you just sign, but the lender and the borrower agree if there's ever a dispute, if there's ever a lawsuit, in this case, California law applies. California has a 4-year statute of limitations for student loans. That could work out. So if you get one of these lawsuits, one of your defenses is, hey, there's a choice of law provision, and here's what the choice of law provision looks from one of these Bank of America contracts. Shazam. That's the choice of law provision, all right? That's in your contract. If it's Pennsylvania or Rhode Island, it's still in your contract. So if you're being sued in a state other than California or other than the state that the choice of law has, that's tip number two for you. You can cause some real problems for SLS. You can maybe get the case ignored or dismissed. Here's an example of SLS's lawsuit. Shazam. And I will put on my website, collectionstopper.com podcast plus, an example of my answer, which says, choice of law is wrong. We have one of these letters that show full balance was asked for. And then tip number 3, which is chain of title, proof of assignment. That's tip number 3. If you can allege, as I have alleged on my website, collectionstopper.com, for a couple of answers to an SLS lawsuit in both. I'll try to get you a Michigan one, and I'll get you a couple of Florida ones there. Also, I'll put the full balance letters that can get you out of debt or jail on the website too. But your counter affidavit, gee, have I said something about counter affidavits before? See these videos. Create your counter affidavit to incorporate those first 2 tips. Choice of law. They've already asked me for the full balance. So if you don't have one of those letters, don't worry. If you sign a sworn affidavit under oath, that I did receive one, they did receive full balance. It's not the exact greatest thing if you have the letter, but that's your that's you under oath. You're telling the court, and you're swearing under oath. You'd be found perjurous, or you'll be accused of perjury if you are lying. So please don't lie. But tip number 3, the chain of title, proof of assignment, is a big one. Now, this is what the bill of sale looks like from SLS, proving that specifically your debt was purchased by them. Shazam! You can see that is just a general bill of sale, right? That's not you. Now, the counter affidavit, we've talked about counter affidavits and selling your story and showing your defenses. We'll say there's no debt there. It's just a bill of sale. And again, you've seen my counter affidavits talking about proof of assignment and chain of title issues. That's proof. For them bringing a all-incorporating bill of sale and saying, yep, his or her debt's in there, baloney. So that's an affirmative defense that they don't have the chain of title or proof of assignment from Bank of America to SLS, specifically with your debt. Again, I've said I'll put a SLS complaint up there, and I'll also Comcast podcast plus on collectionstopper.com. Another good tip: when you're in the lawsuit, you have a case number. That enables you to subpoena the Bank of America records. Ask for all the records and proof that your debt was sold to SLS. I don't think you're going to find it, but ask. Also, subpoena, I've done this. Subpoena, if I can find it, I'll put it on the website too, but subpoena Sunrise Collections for proof of those letters. So if you don't have the letter, but you're in the lawsuit and you have a case number, you're allowed to subpoena relevant information. It's relevant as to your defense. Ask Sunrise Collections to send you a copy of that letter. You may be surprised. A subpoena has subpoena power. That's almost as strong as Parker power. Anyway, that's tip number 4. Tip number 5, securitization, folks. Here's 2 videos on securitization. It works. I have deposed SLS and asked them specifically about, wasn't the debt securitized? They get real nervous and weird when I ask that question. I'm wondering if no one's ever asked that before. But it's Bank of America. Go on Bank of America, put the date or the year of your loan. Go on Google and say, do it like this: financial reports, 10K, let's say 2018, and maybe throw in the word securitization. You'll get all their documents and they'll tell you exactly whether in 2018 they securitized these loans, and they probably did. That's a defense, because if they did securitize your debt, there has to be an assignment from the secured trust back to Bank of America before it then sells to SLS. That was not done. Nobody does. They may do it in a couple of years, because I'm pushing real hard on this, and hopefully others are. So that's a possibility that'll get you some good stuff, a good defense. But the burden of proof remains. All these tips are saying to SLS, you've got the burden of proof. Here are my defenses showing you have not met your burden of proof. And here's some good defenses. Number 1, the whole balance letter. Number 2, the choice of law. Number 3, chain of title, proof of assignment defense. Number 4, subpoena the bank records. You can. You're allowed. You're entitled to a defense. And number 5, look into securitization, whether the debt was securitized. Therefore, it can't be sold to SLS. Therefore, see number 3. There's a chain of title, proof of assignment problem. All right. Try to make this a quickie and a goodie, because a lot of people have SLS problems and lawsuits. And I know for a fact it's really tough. People having trouble getting out of these 10 or 15-year-old debts. Now you have a chance. And I'll put the stuff on Podcast Plus. I'll even say it correctly on collectionstopper.com. Please subscribe, like, and I will continue to bring you more stuff. Thank you very much. Bye.